Uh, well, good morning, and thank you very much for having me. I should just clarify, I'm an architectural historian rather than an architect, and Joe Noero is based in Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm based in London, England. But I do know Joe very well, I know his work well, and I'm preparing a book on it, so that's why I'm representing him. Anyway, I want to talk about architecture and the consequences of apartheid, which is bringing together what law separated and how that can be seen in Joe's work. Apartheid means separateness, in other words, the opposite of together. And these maps show the condition of South Africa under apartheid, divided arbitrarily into areas where people with different skin colours were allowed to live, supposedly different racial characteristics, both in the macro scale of the main country, whole country on the left, and in the area around Cape Town, where Joe lives and works, on the right. And as you can see, it's very, very fragmented, often with arbitrary divisions, other than the places where poor people were expected to live tend to be those with less water, less infrastructure, less rich land. Sorry. Now, bringing this down to the level of urbanism and architecture, the problems you can see here, which in the front of this picture at the top you see shacks, which is the common home of many of the poor of South Africa. Not as many as would have been 25 years ago, but still a very common condition. Those shacks are unsanitary, they're unsafe. If they have electricity, they take it illegally on a very dangerous spur from an overhead cable. They're not safe. All sorts of problems accrue from them. But also the other problem this captured is alienation and the lack of access to opportunity. The buildings in the background are what I will talk about later as part of the solution, part of a cultural centre designed by Joe Noero for this very poor township called Red Location outside Port Elizabeth, in many ways the Detroit of Africa, because it is where many cars are assembled. And in the bottom right, you see something of the alienation, which is seen in the museum, so it's a recreation of it, where these great metal boxes exclude people and separate people, but they also refer to the boxes in which people put literally all their possessions. So there's poverty, deprivation, and alienation. So how could this be put back together again? Well, the political changes of the early 1990s are, of course, a start. Nelson Mandela, who was a great figure of that period, spoke about the rainbow nation, bringing people together, and you see that in the painted face on the bottom. On the top is a housing scheme called Lenasia, which dates from the early 1990s for mine workers. Now, the solution was legal. It was to create a new constitution and to incorporate an existing Bill of Rights. And I've listed there several clauses from it that seem to me to be architecturally relevant in bringing people together. And then how does it actually work? How can architecture, the idea of shape, form, mass, color, the experience of architecture bring people together? And these are various different examples. On the top left is a church in Somerset West outside Cape Town, where we can see the architecture, this great floating drum, tends to infer unity. On a smaller scale, in a school in Cape Town, again, a sort of drum-like shape brings people together informally, where they can work together, where they can exchange ideas and make friends. On the top right, perhaps the most important project of these ones, St. Paul's Church in Soweto, dating from the 1980s, the high point of apartheid, where Noero was appointed by Bishop Desmond Tutu to be the architect of the Anglican diocese, and to design not just churches but cultural centres, community centres around them, so that some basic social provision, some basic concept of being together could be achieved. On the bottom right is an image from the building featured here in the exhibition, the House of Hope outside Cape Town. I'll talk about a bit more. So some more projects that show how architecture can bring people together. On the top left, a careers centre in Soweto, where there was very high unemployment. People were excluded from the workspace because of lack of skill. This was both a training centre and a employment exchange, and it had to be built incredibly cheaply. So the section has to do the work of cooling, hence this vent, which is intended to draw air through and to keep it cool, and it uses very cheap materials like crinkly tin, corrugated iron. On the bottom right, the Funda Community Centre, another project trying to get people to come together to upgrade their skills and make themselves more employable. Then on the right-hand side, more images from the House of Hope in Cape Town, outside Cape Town, founded by Dennis Goldberg, who was the only white person to be tried alongside Mandela and the other ANC leaders in the Rivonia trial in 1963. He spent 22 years in solitary confinement before being thrown out of the country. He then went back in about 1994 and became an advisor on housing. And he very jealously guarded what he saw as a true ethos of the ANC against what has happened now, which has begun, I think it's fair to say, to unwind what Mandela saw as the Rainbow Nation. So the House of Hope preserves Dennis's legacy. It is also a community centre that gets people engaged in working together, such as this art exhibition on the top image on the right. But the real point here I want to make is about the potential of institutions to bring people together. And this dates from the high period of the Rainbow Nation between the late 90s and 2005, 2006, that sort of period. This is back to Red Location, which we saw in the aerial shot before, the Museum of Apartheid on the top, art gallery on the bottom with interior and exterior. And you can see here that it's beginning to act like a real city. 15 years before this image was taken, it would have been full of troops, probably firing live ammunition, armoured cars, water cannon, all sorts of state violence apparatus. And this now is meant to be a gathering space. It celebrates the idea of an African city based around the street, and also commemorates the action that took place in this area against apartheid. Now, this image on the bottom left, you can see the shack there, which is representative of this shack on the top, the image above. That shack started life as barracks of the British Army in the late 19th century. It was used as accommodation for the concentration camps where the British herded Boer women and children in the Anglo-Boer War of about 1900. It was then repurposed as housing for African people, black people, as they came to work in the city, work in the factories of Port Elizabeth, and it survived more or less in that form until it was replaced by this building about 15 years ago. And the art gallery is built to all modern standards. It could house major exhibitions, but sadly, because of the unwinding of the concept of the Rainbow Nation, this has been defunded. It's become overly politicized and has shut. Another project here, which is about bringing people together, is the Table House. And to do this, again, to address this incredible need for residential accommodation, Joe went back to first principles, no less than Abbot Logier on the bottom left. You see the famous frontispiece from his L'Essai sur l'architecture of 1753. He doesn't have the portico, but he does have the four columns and the beams between them. And that is because in this area around Cape Town, you have very strong winds and shacks blow over. This metal structure, which could be built at the time for about $750, gave stability. You can put two on top of each other, so you could have two shacks on the same area, costing $1,500. They are quite strong, as you can see from the people standing on them, but most importantly, they can be put together, which relates to a clause in the Constitution where if housing can be recognized as a formal settlement by not by shacks, but by this sort of structure, it can gain political recognition. Moving very quickly, education, bringing people together, an archive from Red Location, which will include some of the most important documents of the period, including the manuscripts of Mandela's prison journal, and the University of Western Cape, a university for the previously disadvantaged communities, which is being repurposed largely through Jay's work as what hoped to become a major university. This is another project in an area north of Cape Town, a fossil park, 4.5 million-year-old fossils, and the advantage of that is that they're pre-humanoid. So So no one can say, my ancestors were here before yours. This is shared patrimony for all the nations of South Africa, and it's been made accessible through this fossil park. And then finally, an ongoing project, which is a museum for the First Nations people. That's the people, the Khoisan herders and hunter-gatherers who occupied the area around Cape Town before any other races settled there. About 37 different nations there. They feel they've been colonialized at least 3 times, and this is a museum which commemorates their work and their culture. Thank you very much.